All right, we are live. Welcome everybody to another webinar of Data Minded. This webinar will be a little bit less technical than the ones that you're used to. Today we're going to talk about data maturity, specifically about why you should invest in data maturity. This is a first webinar in a series of 3. The webinar about what do we mean exactly, well, a deep dive into the pillars of data maturity, if you will, and then there will be a third webinar about concrete use cases or concrete success cases that we see at companies who have invested a lot in data and are also reaping the rewards. For those of you who don't know me yet, I'm Chris Peters. I'm the founder and CEO of Data Minded, and today I have with me the one and only Johnny Dane. Johnny, can you quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Johnny Dane. I'm a senior data engineer at Data Minded. I'm currently working for a large financial client. And next to that, I'm also focusing on data maturity topics at Data Minded itself.
All right, cool. I hope everybody can hear us quite all right. If you can post in the chat somewhere, if you understand us well, if the video is working, let us know. I think it should be there somewhere. If you have questions, I think you can also ask questions on the platform. We have a few interactive questions as well through Mentimeter, but feel free to just interrupt us and we'll monitor this page as well. That being said, let's dive into the content, right? So we only have half an hour. We want to bring it short and sweet. After that, we have a half an hour left for Q&A, should there be a need. So if you have like longer questions, we can always discuss at the end. Let's see which one. I think this one. Select. So why should you grow in data maturity? Why is it important to do this? In order to talk about the why, we have to talk a little bit about the what, right? We won't dive super deep into all the pillars. That's something for next webinar. But in fact, what we see is a lot of companies, they all dream about data and AI. So when we talk about them, they all dream about the most fancy self-driving cars and their companies being completely run by AI, all the processes being perfect, all their customers being happy. So when you talk to companies about, do you want to invest in data? Do you want to know more about your customer? Do you want to have more optimized processes? They always say yes, right? So everybody wants to invest in data, but in fact, that's not the real question. The real question is, do you really also want to put in the effort? Like it's the same as with your personal health. A lot of people, they all want a healthy body, but one of them want to be super fit, but really do you want to make the time and the effort to do it? It's not always easy. So in reality, we see people not always being that convinced of like, do I really want to put the effort in, right? So they all want it, but they're not really sure if they want to work for it, right? Which brings us to a definition that we came up with of what is it actually, data maturity? What do we mean when we meet an organization that has, in our opinion, a high level of data maturity? Well, in fact, it comes down to 2 dimensions. It comes down to having the ability to build scalable, to deliver data products in a scalable and sustainable way. Right? Johnny, can you explain a bit, because that's a mouthful, right? What do we mean with scalable and sustainable delivery of data products?
Yeah, so let's start with the scalable part of it. So typically, as an organization, you build products or data products, and you want to make sure that they can grow, either in market shares or number of users, or just adding features to the product. And doing that growth, that already requires a good solid product and processes, and making sure that you can scale it requires a really sound understanding of what's going on to make sure that you can do that actual growth. Yeah. And the sustainability part of it is making sure that when you have a very small product and you have it the way you want, you have a high quality product, is keeping that in that way. So being future proof and also looking at the future, can we adjust our processes so that we can deal with change, that we can have the same level of quality, the same time to market, for example, and have a sustainable process in place. Yeah. So these 2 components, they work together for a great data product.
Exactly. So if we map this back to companies, when we see companies who are high on the data maturity axis, I would say they are able to break out data from one department. So typically data starts in the finance department, or sometimes in the marketing department. but it's not because like 2 or 3 financial analysts have access to your data that you're a very data mature company, right? Ideally, your data is being democratized across the entire organization, so all your people have access to data. That's the scalable part again. As a counterexample, I met a head of data of a well-known company, and I keep on using this example because I think it's a good one. He says giving data to our employees is actually like giving live hand grenades to monkeys. So he clearly didn't trust his own people with using data, and he really wanted to shield it, his own little data department. And I think to me that is a very low data maturity response or a low data maturity culture. If you wanna grow in data maturity, you do the opposite. You make sure that everybody has access to data and everybody can act.
You open it up.
Exactly, and the sustainable dimension of it, we see the counterexample there is that sometimes with all the right intentions, people hack together a first use case and they can barely keep it live. It barely works, but it needs a lot of maintenance. That's not sustainable, right? So it's a good first step. I don't want to discourage it. You should recognize that now we need to invest in making it a bit more structured and industrialized, right?
I think in that sense, it's also the mindset where you have to think about a product instead of a project.
Yes.
It's not something that ends at some point. We've seen software evolve from project-based to product-based. You deliver something, but you have to keep it alive, and that takes energy, the right people, the right processes, the right management.
Absolutely.
And that's a difference in mindset.
Absolutely, it's important difference to note. So, but why make the investment, right? As I just compared it, growing in data maturity to having a healthy body, like everybody wants it, nobody wants to work for it. So why would you want to work for it? Why is it important for you as an organization to actually make the investment? I think it boils down to 5 dimensions. First, it's an obvious one, but you obviously want to reach your company goals and ambitions that you set outside of data, right? Every company has their ambitions, and data can be an enabling factor there. Second, you want to continuously improve what you have without big strategic plans, just very operational, see what can run better in your organization today versus yesterday. Thirdly, create a competitive advantage. So markets are under a lot of pressure these days. If you can use data as a competitive advantage, it can secure a lot of revenue and profits for years to come. Fourth, you can be a bit more like long-term and really innovate based using data. And fifth is like, you also want to benchmark yourself a bit against the industry, like that you're not running behind versus your peers, right? So we'll dive into each one of those specifically here. Maybe Johnny, you can start with this one. What do we mean? How can data help you achieve your needs and ambitions?
Yeah, so every company, they have specific goals, specific KPIs, they have their needs, their ambitions. They want to reach a specific goal or goals. And to reach those goals, you have multiple efforts that align with. And when we look at the top performing companies, the top performing organizations, we see that 20% of their revenue comes from AI initiatives. This is a lot. If you think about AI initiatives, you're not even thinking about data initiatives, which are even broader, which is support more processes, more products in an organization. So that means it's really important to get that part right. And it also means you can tie that up to your needs and ambitions. If you have a specific ambition as a company, for example, to increase your quality, to reduce your time to market, to increase your revenue, then you might want to look at your data and how it can help you reach those goals.
Yeah, indeed. I think about 10 years ago, Marc Andreessen had this famous quote about every company turning into a software company, and that has held true. You see banks being transformed into software companies, media companies being supply chain companies, everything becomes software, right? Which is a trend will continue for years to come. But as a new trend in the wake of that trend, I think also every company is becoming a data and analytics company. And you might not realize it yet, but more and more data is becoming a key element to reach your ambitions, right?
Absolutely.
And those companies high in data maturity, again, they realize it today already and they're investing heavily. Those who are not there yet, they should wake up, I would say. The next one is to use data specifically as a key for innovation. And one of the more famous examples there is, I think you all have heard of the Netflix prize. So in the Netflix prize, what Netflix offered was we have a certain way of guessing how much you would like a TV show or a movie, a rating. Can you improve our rating prediction with at least 10%? If you can do that, you get $1 million. The competition was launched in 2006. It was only awarded in 2009, so it took 3 years for the data science community to come up with a better algorithm. So it brought a lot of innovation for Netflix. It brought a way better understanding of their customers, of how they rate their shows. But at the same time, it also had 2 caveats. One is that allegedly Netflix never implemented the algorithm because it was way too hard to industrialize, so it wasn't worth the effort, which is weird because they just spent $1 million for it, but then in the end it wasn't worth it. And secondly is they planned a sequel, but in the end they didn't do the sequel because of privacy concerns. So what happened was that researchers cross-referenced the anonymous Netflix data set with the IMDb ratings, and they could identify individual users, and so they could see the entire viewing history of those users, which led to lawsuits and stuff like that.
That's also a good example of how the industry has shifted, or at least how efforts have shifted. While we do all have access to all this technology and we know what could be possible, still it has become quite complex to do all of that. All the regulations and the legal parts, they sometimes can hinder or become challenges to start doing something with data. And I think you can see that at a lot of companies, that there's always a question, well, can we even do these things? Exactly. And there's like a hindrance.
And I think it's a healthy trend, right? So we're not in 2009 anymore, we're 2022 here, and there's still a lot of value to be gained from data, but it's not the Wild West anymore.
Exactly.
Even if there's not a lot of regulation yet besides GDPR, still companies self-regulate, if you will. They can't afford the bad press. Next is using data as a competitive advantage.
So when you leverage data for your own goals, you can also start looking a bit more broad. If you look at multiple industries, let's say Tesla, they looked at their own data, but they now offer a personalized insurance based on that. So they leverage what they collected from the driving data, and now they completely have a product that spans both the automotive sector and the financial sector, all by the use of IT and by data. So that means there's a lot of potential in the data that you have. And if you take that to the next level, you can completely disrupt an existing market, like the insurance market in this case.
Yeah, because if you think about it, insurance is actually quite of a, well, I would say the original way of how to do insurance is kind of dumb, right? They look at some maybe demographic data, like how old are you? If you're younger, you're going to pay more for a driver's license. What's your gender? They look at that, like some of the which regions do you live, like which cities do you live, because some cities are more dangerous than others. But it's only very limited information that they have to give you an insurance product. While a company like Tesla, they have your exact driving behavior. They know exactly how you drive. They don't care if you're 20 or 50, right? They don't care if you're male or female. They don't care which cities you drive. They know exactly how you drive. They know how risky your behavior is. So in that sense, they can give a much more fine-tuned insurance product to you versus any competition, right? So that's really disrupting use cases like this.
And I think while this can spark different debates about the ethics and all of this behind it, it's still important to recognize that there's multiple things that you can do with your data that you haven't thought of. It allows you to think out of the box and create entirely new products or go to new market segments just by using the data that you already collected.
Absolutely, yeah. And then the next one is a bit more boring one, but you can definitely use data as a way to do continuous improvement. So what do I mean by that? I think I've shared this slide a few times, so if you followed our webinars, you've seen this before. But every company has 4 aspects to it, right? If you will, every company has customers, hopefully, else you won't be in business for long. Every company has people, like the owners, employees, contractors, whatever, that work in that company. Every company has products to offer. Services can also be products. And every company has some kind of operations they need to run. And in all of these 4 dimensions, without being very strategic about which new disruptive innovation can we launch, whatever, just keeping the lights on your current day-to-day business. So how can I empower my employees? How can I engage my customers? How can I transform my products? How can I improve my operations? You do that by start monitoring all of these things. start collecting data points, trying to get insights, what's working well, what's not working not so well, and drive decisions based on that. Today, most companies only do that by looking at their financial numbers. But financial, right? It's not that your accountant comes to you and says, hey, I made a profit this month. Well, you cannot smarter about your use of data, right?
Yeah, I think this also ties in with the culture of a company and also the ambitions that the people have, and everybody could help in continuous improvement. It's a mindset that you should have, and that will fuel this entire loop and make a better company and a better product in the end.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then finally, you can also use data to benchmark yourself against the industry. So
yeah, so when you look at multiple industries, you can see that some of them, they're a bit less mature, or they have a bit less maturity in digital transformation. But even inside these industries, you can benchmark yourself. How am I with respect to my competitors? Am I the outlier? Am I a high performer? But also across the industries, there's a lot of learnings that you can find. You can learn a lot from the other industries, see how they leverage data, how do they tackle innovation, how are they being disruptive, how do they move along in the future, and you can, well, mimic maybe a few of that things or take the best learnings to your own industry.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And so this is one study done that looks at the current state of analytics on one axis, and let's say the state of digital transformation on the other axis. And you see industries like media and entertainment were very advanced in the use of analytics, and that's also what we see, by the way, while other industries like travel or logistics or insurance, a little bit less so, right? And there, if you're in one of those industries that are not so advanced, you can always try to get inspired by the industries who are, right?
There's a lot of margin, I think, for growth and for improvements.
Absolutely.
Lots of opportunities.
Yeah. All right. With that, my next slide is not loading. Before we switch to, it's there.
Yeah.
Sorry, my screen is not loading for some reason. But before we go to the next slide, I want to quickly turn this to you, to the audience. I would like to go, let's see if I can post a link here. I'd like you to go to Mentimeter. I'll copy a link. And in Mentimeter, I'm going to ask you a few questions. So let's see if I can chat here. I posted the link, so if you go to that link, you should go to Mentimeter. And then we're curious about the 5 reasons to invest in data we just asked you. Can you rank those reasons? Which ones are most important for you? Is it reach your goals and ambitions, your business goals? Is it continuous improvement of your company? Is it to create a competitive advantage? Is it to build innovative products with data? Or is it to benchmark against the industry? Which ones are most important for you, and which ones are less important? I'll share my screen in the meantime, so you can follow along with. Where I, sorry, I'm struggling. I'm sorry, guys. I'm not sure where to share my screen. Anybody knows IT here? Maybe here, share screen. There's a big button that I wasn't paying attention to. Here we go. Okay, so the results are coming in. So we have two winners. I will wait a bit. So 7 answers. It's to reach goals and ambitions and build innovative products mostly. Not so much benchmarking, not so much continuous improvement. Okay.
I think that might make sense, right? The lack of benchmarking or the lack of interest in benchmarking might be because a company always has its own vision still, right?
Yeah, indeed. It's good to see that people want to innovate with data. So it's not just keeping the lights on; it's really bringing the next thing to market. So that interesting finding. This will be updated a bit as we go along. But let's go back to the presentation for now. So stop sharing my screen. We're going to switch back to the presentation.
Yeah.
So the data maturity index, can I do like this? We launched the data maturity index, and I always say we, I mean Johnny, because Johnny, you did most of the work here. Can you talk a bit to the audience about what is it,
Yeah, so the data maturity index, as it says, it's a guide to become a data-minded organization at scale. We talked about scale, we talked about sustainability, all of the why of the data maturity itself. And we thought about how can we put that into a measurable test to make it a bit more objective.
Yeah.
Because let's be honest, a lot of these things depend on the organization. It's a bit subjective. It's debatable, all of this. But so what have we done? We have tried to collect from all the engineers at Data-Minded, who together have a lot of experience at a lot of different industries and different companies. We collected the best parts of that, the best learnings. What do we see at high-performing organizations? And we've tried to emphasize all the positive things. How can you reach a next level in data maturity, even when you start at zero?
Yeah.
So what are the first steps you can take? What are the best practices? And we've chopped that up into 6 different dimensions so that you can do your own scoring of that. So the reason or the goal is that we can provide a holistic view so that you do not have like a single point. You see a lot of scans or indexes that focus on technology or AI and machine learning or on data itself. But I think it's important to look at everything as a whole. As we said, there's a lot of things at play here, like the needs and actions. We have to focus on more than just those 3 things. Yeah. So let's go briefly over the categories. We have organization, which tells you about how good is data represented in the vision. Is the leadership actually aware of where data can take you?
That's do they care, right?
Yeah, do they care?
Because if they don't care, then it stops right there, right?
Yeah, indeed.
You can have all the technology in the world. If leadership doesn't care, end of story.
Exactly. So that's a very important measure. We have a lot of sub-metrics that we will discuss in the next webinar, but that's the gist of it. It's like the vision, does it align with the data? And then we have the product itself. As you said, all of the organizations are delivering a product, whether it's a service or an internal tool or an external product. You're always delivering something. And ideally, you want to have the time to market very low with high quality. That's the best of both. That's not always achievable, but that's something that you can measure at least. And you want to see what's your current state and where do you want to grow to. Then you have technology. And as we've seen over the last decades, we've seen a lot of technology, especially in the data front and on the machine learning front. But how do you leverage them? It's not just a matter of the technology being there and adopting it. How do you adopt it? Do you apply best practices? So that's really important in terms of technology. And there's a lot of open source tools available as well. Do you make a build versus buy decision? Do we build something ourselves? Do we take something off the shelf? So that's for technology. And then, of course, we have the data part. Data itself, you have to make sure that the quality is right, that the governance is right, just to make sure that you can take the best of it, that you can leverage it.
Yep.
Then there's the process. We've talked about agile processes and being flexible, but in the end, your process, it needs to support your product. The time to market, the quality, that's what we discussed before. That's what the process should actually entail. And then finally, we have the people. The people are key in this whole process. They're the ones that have the skills, that have the mindset, that have the culture. They carry all of this to the next level.
And that's, by the way, often a bottleneck. Finding the right people with the right skills,
the right talent.
Yeah, absolutely. And also giving them enough autonomy to actually do their thing, not constraining them too much. Maybe it's time now to switch back to Mentimeter. So if you go back to menti.com, the same link that I shared, I'm going to go to the next question. So if you look at these, some people already filled them out. Of course, well, we did a whole survey to give you a good score on this, but based on the description that Johnny just gave you, how far do you think you are in terms of data maturity on these dimensions? Are you at the very beginning, or are you very mature already in investments? And hopefully we're going to see some trends that also come back in the people who responded to the survey, because we're going to talk about that in a bit.
Will you share that too?
Yes. Maybe it's a good idea, Johnny, that I'll share my screen again. So is my screen being no?
Lights are still on, I think.
Yeah, it takes a while for the. You're currently sharing your screen. It should be there. All right. So what do we see? People are very modest. I think there's a lot of Belgian people in the audience. They're always very modest. Like, no, we're not so good. But you see already one trend which I want to pick up on. From all the dimensions, technology is the one the most people assess themselves as being the furthest thing.
Yeah.
And that's also what we saw in the actual survey. So if you do a way more advanced survey or ask way more detailed questions, you will get a score back, and you'll get a score on each of the dimensions. But we see technology as a dimension scoring quite high. Process as a dimension scoring very low.
That's an interesting one.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So 16 answers by now. So maybe I'll go back to the presentation, see if I can do it like this. Yeah. So I think we collected almost 100 survey results already, right? So we'll share a link to the survey in the end. We collected already 100 results. There are 3 conclusions we can remark, of course. Can you hear us now?
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry about that, guys. I don't know, the platform gave an error. Yeah, so process automation about having DevOps processes, not just having your typical agile processes, but really what makes you go fast is to have all this automation in place. That makes you iterate fast in production. Like a Scrum board won't make you go fast, it just gives you visibility on where you are, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And then finally, also, technology is there to serve you, not the other way around. So we see a lot of companies already heavily investing in technology, which is great. Us engineers, we love it. I mean, we build cool stuff. But if you do it in isolation without working on the other dimensions, what you often see is platforms not being used for actual use cases. So you build it for, looks good on your CV, but in the end,
yeah, exactly. You're not going to build a rocket for the sake of it. You're building the rocket to go to the moon.
Absolutely, absolutely. And with that, I think those are good words to go to the next step. So if you want to find out yourself how you're doing with this, so if you go to that URL, I'll also post it in the chat. If I can find url.com/data maturity. I'll post it in a bit, data maturity scan it is. Here you go. Just a second, guys. Sorry. If you go to that URL, you can take the survey yourself and you can get an idea of where you are in each of the dimensions. So here are 4 examples of companies who completed the survey. And then you see the thick line is where they are today, and then the thinner line is where they hope to be. So not everybody hopes to be at 100% on everything, because it's just not realistic. But if you take the first company for an example, you see that's an example of a company heavily invested in heavily invested in technology. But in terms of the product, they haven't shipped anything or not a lot to production yet. They haven't invested a lot in making the data available. The processes are not that good. So this is an example of all the technology is there to make something great, but probably you're not getting the velocity that you want, right? The yellow example is a more mature company who are quite quite advanced in all axes, but then again, you see them struggling with not making the data available to to their users. So that's something that comes back time and time again. So if you want to know more about that, feel free to do the survey yourself. Then if you want to know more, what can I do with this score? Like, so what? Definitely get in touch so we can dive into it together. With that being said, because I see we're also out of time, there's a 6 Pillars of Data Maturity webinar coming in 2 weeks. I think this is the 3rd of May. I should put it on the website or the slide. But if you go to that URL again, Pillars of Data Maturity, tinyurl.com, Pillars of Data Maturity, you can subscribe and follow the next webinar. You also get an email of that, of course. With that, we're out of time. So there's some time for questions, so Q&A. So if you go back to menti.com and there are some questions. What are you struggling with the most to get to the next level of data maturity, or just in general, what kind of questions do you have? If you want to stay for the questions, you're definitely welcome. If you like to wrap up your lunch here and go back to work, feel free as well. With that, thanks for your time. I hope it was helpful. And for those who don't stay around for the questions, I'm going to see you next time. All right. For those who are still here, let's switch. I'll share my screen again, and we can go to the questions. So go back to Mentimeter, menti.com. So what are you struggling with the most in terms to get to the next level? Or if you have questions in general, feel free to shoot them here. I'll wait for a bit until people start dropping their first questions. Was it helpful, the webinar? Did you learn something that you didn't hear before? Did it give you some framework to work on? And now we wait. Maybe while we're waiting, can you talk a bit about how did you actually get the idea of creating that data maturity index?
Well, at my first day at Data Minded, I was speaking to a few of the colleagues, and we were discussing. We see a lot of the same patterns at different companies, and we follow a typical approach for some common problems. And so while we do a tailored approach for all of them, we still see a lot of things being repeated. So partially, we wanted to collect all of those learnings and then have an idea of what's going on and how can we do things faster. So also continuous improvement on Data Minded itself. But then we realized, well, this would be even more useful if we can get this out there, if people can do their own assessment. So we can bring back that knowledge back to the community and making sure that this is adopted and that people can actually work with it and that they can spread the word.
Yeah, because for really being honest, well, it took you a lot of work, right? Don't get me wrong, but a lot of it is common sense. A lot of it is just, we've seen these things quite a few times and they go right at all the same moments and they also go wrong at all the same moments. So it's about structuring and synthesizing all the knowledge into a framework that hopefully guides other companies to, if you just fill out the framework or the survey, you should get an idea of which dimensions to work on. Then next, you can download the white paper that goes into depth. In the next webinar, we'll also go into the depth in each of the topics, but it should give you some bearings of where am I in my journey.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, I see some questions or some answers coming in. I think mostly to the question I asked, like what are you struggling with the most? Measuring ROI in terms of competitive advantage. Yeah, that is, to be honest, that is super hard because you can start a data initiative in Q1 and in Q2 see 20% increase in revenue or 50% increase in profit. Is that because of a data initiative, right? It's you can do A/B testing if you want, but that is very hard. So to be honest, measuring the ROI as a competitive advantage versus your competitors is very often hard. On the other hand, what you can do, I think, is just take a few dimensions of your business that are not well, apply data to those, like in the continuous improvement bucket, apply data to those domains and see that you're doing better in the next quarter. And that often you can put a number on that, right? We saved 100,000 euro in capital expenses because we handle our assets smarter, right? That is something that can be very concrete. Or we identified 5 customers who wanted to churn. We talked to them, they don't churn anymore. So that makes it very tangible, right?
Yeah. But it remains a difficult challenge to really quantify and tie that back to all the initiatives.
Yeah, and maybe cursing here, but you don't have to be 100% scientific about it. If you have a good gut feeling that your data initiatives are linked back to better performance, that's good enough for a first step, right? But often also, don't invest €1 million in your first data initiative, right? Because then you want to make the numbers work. Then it's like, yeah, we invested €1 million, so whatever the outcome will be, it will be positive because I have to present this to the board. Like, do small steps, do small iterations, and learn. Also, for us at Data-Minded, by the way, if I'm really being honest, up until recently, we only did financial analytics. We got a meeting with the accountant every month, and he said, yeah, this is your revenue, this is your profit, this is your or loss, this is your cash flow. And it's like, okay, but and even there was a funny story, a scary story. There was one month where the accountant came back and said, congratulations, you made 3 times more profit this month than any other month. But nobody could explain why. It is very scary, like because also the opposite happens. Like, it's like there's no profit. Why is there no profit this month? Like, yeah. So investing more in data gives you a much better feeling of where your organization is heading, and we're investing a lot ourselves in operational data analytics, understanding where we're doing well, where we're not doing well, are our efforts paying off? All of that, it's the basics, that's common sense, but
it's going beneath that surface to understand what's more or less going on.
Exactly, indeed. So let's see some of the other responses here. The people responsible of the data aren't communicative and troublesome to collaborate with. It's a painful truth. As a person who is responsible for data, often it's definitely recognizable, and it goes two ways. The end answer should be that there should not be a difference between the data practitioners and the business. So if you heard about this data mesh philosophy, the idea is that your data people do not sit in a data department, but they are distributed across your organization. So they're distributed together, they work directly together with business. And you might have some data people still, well, for platform operations and infrastructure work, but your actually use cases should be done in the business teams. I don't know if you have any other tips there, Johnny, how to bridge the gap between the data and business?
Just that it's not that simple as most people think it is, in the sense that making data accessible, it can become quite complex, which is why we have these 6 dimensions as well. It's not like you have a one-fits-all solution. It's not like you can bring in some technology that will solve it for you. But indeed, as you're saying, you have this goal maybe of a data mesh architecture, but absolutely. Getting there requires quite some effort and sometimes a cultural change. The example you gave earlier about the hand grenade, that's also gut feeling. You don't give people data because you could give them a hand grenade. The fact that people think that, it's also gut feeling. Other people might just say, you do give the data, it makes the people aware of, indeed. So both are a gut feeling, but you want to go, that actually shows that it's more complex than just the gut feeling. You want to go beneath that surface and look a bit deeper. And it might require organizational change, because the example that was posted here, it shows that it's sometimes difficult to get into the right processes.
Yes, and organizational changes is the hardest thing to change.
Yeah.
Like getting organizations to change the way they work is the most difficult and takes the most time to do, definitely. Yeah.
And that's why we also said start small. Maybe there's already a use case that they can do cross-team to experiment with these things and see if it works for that organization.
What we've seen work at organizations is the first use case you do, the nucleus of your data efforts, I would say, you do in an isolated team. So against the best practices that we just talked about, just a focused, dedicated data team that delivers that use case. And if that use case is successful, like in business terms, it creates more money than it costs, then you will see interest from other departments. And then the trap that you fall into is like, let's draw all the departments to me, and I'm the big king of data, and I will do all the use cases for them. No, then you should take the opposite approach. Then make sure just you serve them. You are an enabler for those business units. So instead of doing all the use cases for all the business units and creating a bottleneck for yourself, is what can we do to enable the distributed delivery of use cases?
And that's the challenge with the scalability and the sustainability in the end.
Absolutely. That's exactly that. Having a single data department that does all the data work, I also compared, like, nobody has a single emailing department that does all the emailing work, right? You might have a PR agency or PR department that, if it's a really important, critical communication, that's what your PR department does. But the PR department doesn't do all the communication of your company, right? Everybody does their own emailing. In the same vein, everybody should also do their own data analytics.
And you're working towards a common goal. The end goal is not protecting all the data or not making, the end goal is the product you're offering. It has data protection inside, of course, but the end goal is that you all collaborate and try to unblock one another to reach that goal.
Absolutely. Indeed.
And that's an important mindset, I think.
Indeed. So coming to the next question or remark, and feel free to add to this, guys. So if you, is closing the gap between business, data, and IT teams, that's basically what we talked about just now. It's hard. As we said, start small. The first successful use case officer, but again, they should be there as an enabler, not as a department that does everything.
Indeed. Another thing there is also that fits in that is multidisciplinary teams, making feature teams that are focused on delivering a product. That can also help by bridging the gaps between the teams or crossing the boundaries.
Yeah, indeed. And then the fourth comment that comes back is the acceptance that business is also a data owner and data is not owned by IT. Well, I can only enforce that. It's even stronger. Data should never be owned by IT. That's actually one of the misconceptions, I would say. If you have a central data department, you often start, hey, let's do a first use case and let's ingest customer data and product data, and here's some network data, and the smart data engineers and scientists, they will make something out of it. I've been in that position for a long time. I'm often the person who knows least about that data set, right? I don't know how your customer data looks like. I don't know how your product data looks like. Your business people who work with customer data, they
are the domain experts.
Right? So they are the data owner. And I know a lot about building pipelines and building code and deploying to production and all of that. I can help you with that, but I'm definitely not a domain expert on your data. And that's also something that, I mean, please keep working with consultants because that's what we do. But that's something it's very hard to outsource, and you shouldn't outsource that. Like your domain expertise, it's always something you need to build in-house. An example there is that there was a quite advanced algorithm that was built for a particular client, and we made sure that algorithm was live. We didn't touch the algorithm. That was a data scientist of the client said, hey, I have this cool algorithm. If we can only bring it live, it will create a lot of value for the business. And then we started from that algorithm, made sure we connected the right data, made sure all the security was there, blah, blah, blah. But we couldn't come up with a better algorithm. That's also very, very dangerous thing to think like, we're just going to outsource all of that to a third party. That often doesn't work that way, right? Yeah. And so to come back to data ownership, your data should always be owned by somebody who knows about the data. And your technical people should move to that department to help them make their use case or whatever, and not the other way around. Yeah, absolutely. With that, I'm seeing there's still quite a few of you left, so I guess the questions were interesting. If you have no further questions to ask, I think we can wrap up. If you have any other things that you want to share or shout, feel free to do it here or either in I'll go back. I'll wait a bit more. But if there's no more questions coming, I think we can wrap up here. thanks all for your time. I hope it was an engaging discussion, and we'll see each other in 2 weeks.
Bye-bye.